Recording.
You got it?
Yeah, I just went and just let me get the recording started again. Okay, so now everything's all set up and welcome, and we're excited to hear your class today.
Radhastami Mahamotsav Vijay.
Jai Vivo.
Well, it's nice to be with you all on this auspicious occasion. And I want to speak a little bit today from something I came across several months back from Jiva Goswami's Priti Sandarbha, which really stuck out for me. He makes a statement there with no further comment or explanation that really begs an explanation. And I want to talk about that. And well, the statement is basically that the Kantabhav of Braj is Sakhya Mishra. Kantabhav refers to the bhava of the heroine, Krishna being the hero, and Radha being the principal lover of Krishna. There are two basic types of Madhurya rasa that are emphasized by Rupa Goswami, and they go by different names, but one of the names is Kantabhav and Sakhi-bhav. There are different types of Sakhi-bhav and there are different types of Kantabhav, but just the two basic categories refer to, as we focus in our sampradaya, to Radha as the principal heroine, her Kantabhav, her love for Krishna, her desire to associate in love intimately with Krishna, as Kantabhav, and then Sakhi-bhav refers to her friends, and her assistants, if you will. There are different forms, as they say, of Sakhi-bhav. The type of Sakhi-bhav that's emphasized in our sampradaya, sometimes referred to as Manjari-bhav. So the Sakhi-bhav, in its different forms, all to one extent or another amounts to following the bhav of one of Krishna's heroines, in this case, Radha, and primarily being concerned with uniting Radha and Krishna, assisting Radha in her pursuit, Radha and Krishna in their pursuit of one another. And as I say, the extreme form of that is Manjari Bhav. But it's a curious statement of Jiva Goswami. The Kantabhav of Braj is Sakhya Mishra. Mishra means mixed. So I want to come back to his statement itself in the Sandarbha and explore it in context. But prior to that, I want to discuss a number of different ways in which Sakhya rasa interacts with the Madhurya rasa in Braj and is an essential ingredient in terms of the love affairs of Radha and Krishna. So we'll look at it from different angles and then come back to the statement of Jiva Goswami itself and look at the context of that, which is very startling in a sense. And then we'll, given the context, we'll discuss the implications and I want to cite a verse from Radhastami Goswami's Rajavilasa, which will give support to the implications of what Jiva Goswami is saying. So that's what we're going to do today. And that said, of course, I've written an appendix on this. It would be the very last appendix of my book. It's an afterthought, as appendixes are. But my book and my emphasis, and those of you who know me are aware of this, despite the affinity that my Guru Maharaj expressed for Sakhya rasa, and the fact that I follow in his footsteps, we don't in any way make a case for Sakhya rasa is better than Madhurya rasa, or that Madhurya rasa is better. If at all, we say Madhurya rasa is the highest ideal, and so on and so forth. So I want to take any kind of competitive sensibilities that often come up in these discussions when led by persons who don't have that much feeling really for the whole affair, and, for example, may dismiss Sakhya rasa altogether. If you bring it up, even they think of it as being as if you're competing with them or something. It's just not the case. And the fact is, as we'll see, that these two rasas, among the rasas of Braj, are the only two that are amongst the primary rasas that are compatible with one another. In other words, Vatsalya rasa is not compatible with Madhurya rasa or with Sakhya rasa, and Dasya rasa is neutral with regard to them. But they themselves, Sakhya and Madhurya, are very highly compatible. After all, even a cursory overview of the Braj Leela as it's presented in our Sampradaya makes it very, very clear with regard to the Prakat Leela, the manifest Leela, that Krishna's boyfriends and Krishna's girlfriends, they are all young boys and girls who grow up with one another. They know one another, they like one another, they're friends with one another, and they are participants in Leelas with Krishna that are Leelas that are unknown to those in Vatsalya rasa, largely. As for those in Dasya rasa, well, there are some, the Dasya rasa in Braj is tinged with Sakhya rasa. So some of Krishna's servant friends will participate based on their Sakhya in his romantic life and forest exploits, cowherding exploits, and so forth. So they're compatible, Sakhya rasa and Madhurya rasa. They're friends, as Rupa Goswami describes them, and so they work well together. And we are drawing, as I mentioned at the onset, from something that Jiva Goswami has written, and he himself, amongst all of the founding acharyas, expresses more than anyone else some affinity for Sakhya rasa, despite his own standing, if you will, and identity as Vilas Manjari, one of the Manjaris of Radha. And we see from what's the book? It's a historical book of Gaur Leela, Bhakti Ratnakar, written after the disappearance of Chaitanya Mahaprabhu and some of his associates. We find there in his section on Jiva Goswami that Jiva Goswami had small deities of Radha, of Krishna and Balaram that he worshipped in his childhood and youth. He would worship them, play with them, sleep with them. So habits, formed in youth can carry over, and those impressions from those formative years tend to be very, very lasting. So we find some very beautiful expressions of appreciation for Sakya Rasa on his part. And now he has said, as I mentioned, that the Madhurya Rasa, the Kanta Bhav, this means Radha's Bhav, if you understand the implications, is an example of Madhurya mixed with Sakhya. This is quite extraordinary. You won't hear this anywhere else. And it's just one statement that he places there, and it doesn't say anything about it. So we're going to say a fair amount about it. And there may very well be other opinions. That's a whole other topic. But it's something I say that caught my eye, and I had to take the time to investigate it very, very closely. So again, that's our subject, and we enter into it through Jiva Goswami, who himself expresses some affinity for Sakya Rasa again and again. His favorite name for Krishna, of course, is Gopal. He wrote a book called Madhav Mahotsava. That was dedicated to Rupa Goswami, and the name Madhava, the epithet Madhava for Krishna, was used there in deference to his guru, Rupa Goswami. But his own favorite name for Krishna is Gopal. He wrote the Gopal Champu, for example. In beginning to discuss how these, well, we're already doing it, but go further, these two rasas, Sakhya and Madhurya, interact. Let me go to Rupa Goswami's Ujjwal Nilmani. Ujjwal Nilmani, of course, is his sequel, if you will, to Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu. Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, all the different rasas are described, their various ecstatic ingredients, and so on and so forth. The section in that book concerning Madhurya Rasa and its ingredients is very short comparatively. And he makes up for that, or he writes it briefly there, because he had planned or thought of a further text, Ujjwal Nilmani, which deals exclusively with Madhurya Rasa, despite the fact that in dealing, I should say, with Madhurya Rasa exclusively, in his second chapter, he mentions those companions, male companions of Krishna, who are essential in the Madhurya Rasa loving exchanges of Radha and Krishna. So the hero, Rupa Goswami draws from Sahitya Darpana. This is a book of Vishwanath Kaviraj, one of the earlier writers on Indian aesthetics, drama theory, and so on and so forth, which Rupa Goswami used as a means to explain the world of Bhakti Rasa, the realm of ecstatic love. And therein, it is mentioned that there are 1, 2, must be 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4 types of companions who are male companions of the hero, who will be essential in the romantic affairs of Parakiya. Interesting, Rupa Goswami has added his own, a fifth, but the 4, the Cheta, the Vita, the Vidusaka, and the Pitamarda. Now, of these 4, first, the 5th we'll come to, but of these 4 companions of Krishna, the Cheta. The Cheta is a servant friend whose dasya bhakti is mixed with or bundled with Sakhya rasa, and the Cheta is. I'll draw a little bit on what I've written here, maybe for some of these technical descriptions, but the Cheta is characterized there by Rupa Goswami, again, drawing from the Natya Shastra, previous writings on drama theory and aesthetics. The Cheta is a garrulous, very talkative fellow, and fond of quarrel. And Rupa Goswami describes him further in his own work as skilled in accomplishing, all types of difficult tasks with regard to the intrigue that Parikibhav involves. He's also very bold and can be counted on to engage in acts that require a good measure of secrecy. Now, there are different types of Chetas. The famous Chetas, of course, are Raktak and Patrak. They are not necessarily garrulous or and so on. But just as an aside, but Bangura and Bringara are two Chetas that are companions of Krishna with regard to participating in his romantic life, Chetas. So this is one type. So this is an example of one type, Dasyaras mixed with Sakhya, and here in this case, the Sakhya now will be what's prominent. So when you have these two rasas bundled together here, in the case of Dasya and Sakhya, Dasya is neutral in relation to Sakhya. So they're primarily Dasyas, but there are instances when we find from the Leela they're acting like Sakhyas. So we deduce from that, as Rupa Goswami has, that their Sakhya, that their Dasya is mixed, that their Bhav is what he refers to as Sankul. So when the rasas are, so when they are involved, I should say, in participating in these romantic leelas, then this Sakhya side of their Sankul Bhav is expressing itself. So the Cheta, and then there's the Vita. Vita means like a rogue, and in the Braj Leela, Rupa Goswami gives examples, a couple of examples, Kadara and Bharati Bandhu, two Vitas, and they are said to be very cunning, very persuasive, and they have a reputation, whether it's deserved or not, whether it's actually true, but they have a reputation for being well-versed in the tantric arts and employing herbs and mantras by which one can bring women under one's control. So they use this, either the techniques or more really the reputation for this to and employ it, if you will, in Krishna's service. Rupa Goswami gives an example of Avita speaking with Shamsaki and introducing himself as a friend of her friend. I'm a friend of your friend, and exercising his persuasiveness further, he tells her, in the midst of her man, she's in this instance experiencing man, so she's angry with Krishna. He persuasively speaks to her and says that since the women of Braj know that I have a reputation for certain skills, no one dares to disobey me. So he'll speak to her like this. for fear that he will invoke some mantra and bring her under a spell, and so on and so forth. And therefore, with this kind of persuasion, if you will, relying on his reputation, he says it's not proper for you to give up Krishna, who destroys the chastity of young women by playing on his flute. And he speaks like this. So this is the Vita. And then there's the Vidusaka. So the Vidusaka is a jester, the famous jester, of course, highlighted throughout the Goswami's Leela Granthas is Madhu Mangal. Rupa Goswami also mentions Vasant. And of course, Madhu Mangal is also a Narmasaka. I should hold off here in speaking about the Narmasakas and the Vidusaka in this case, because I'll continue with. So Madhu Mangal is a Vidusaka. Vidusaka is a clown and a glutton, and he's the kind of the personification of comedy in the Braj Leela, very dear to both Radha and Krishna. We'll come back to him because he's also a priyanarma-saka. But before we go to the priyanarma-sakhas, the fourth mentioned in the classical text is the Pirtamarta. The Pirtamarta is one amongst all of these whose male ego is not suppressed in their participation in the romantic life of Radha and Krishna. The others, the Vidusaka, the Cheta, the Vita, and yet to be talked about the priyanarma-saka, all of them, their maleness, if you will, which might attract one, let's say, in an ordinary sense, to the opposite sex, doesn't come into play. And so they're fully able to participate in assisting Krishna in meeting, in rendezvousing with Radha. But the Pitamarta, the classic example of this in the Braj Leela is Sridham. So Sridham is a Priyasaka. The Priyasakas are typically not involved in the romantic life. The Priyanarma is like a second hero, second to Krishna only in qualities. And of course, Sridham is the older brother of Radharani. Now, he doesn't directly participate, but he is mentioned in Rupa Goswami's text at the same time as a companion of Krishna's who is essential in his romantic life. And the example given by Rupa Goswami of how Sridham participates indirectly is one in which he hears about Govardhan Mala's complaints. Govardhan Mala is a strange figure who is said to be the only person in the Braj Leela who's not from the Braj. He's from outside, from Mathura. He comes to be so-called husband of Chandravali, cousin sister of Radha. And he hears that Govardhan Mala is critical of Krishna and bringing into doubt his reputation, suggesting that Krishna is meeting with Chandravali in the forest. So he becomes very upset at this, very heroic, expresses some vira rasa and threatens Govardhan Mala. So his threatening of Govardhan Mala and his praise of Krishna, well, all kinds of boys go to the forest. We go every day, you're extrapolating here in your mind and so forth. And he basically threatens Govardhan Mala. So the point here, only with regard to the Pitamarta's participation in the romantic affairs of Radha and Krishna, is that they are aware of them. Here he's indirectly involved, if you will, although not directly participating, that nonetheless aware of them, and considered a companion that's essential. So these are four, here we have four types of sakhas, the Cheta, the Vita, the Vidusaka, the Pitamarta, and then the fifth. And the fifth, of course, is the priyanarma-sakha. We mentioned Madhu Mangal as a Vidusaka, and at the same time, he's also the priyanarma-sakha. His status as the priyanarma-sakha, however, is of course, unique in that his Vidusaka sensibilities are prominent. And so as a jester, he also at times seems a little bit clueless, or he in the presence of elders and others, he may say things about Radha and Krishna, or in the presence of Chandravali, he may say something about Radha and Krishna that reveals something that they shouldn't have heard about, that Krishna wouldn't want them to hear about, embarrasses Krishna and causes more intrigue and more reasons that Krishna has to make up for it and so forth. So he's a little unique in that regard, not an example in all respects that we should follow in the pursuit of such bhava ourselves, if we're so inclined, the bhava that is of a priyanarma. But to go on about the priyanarmas, it's very interesting to note here that, as I mentioned, the Rupa Goswami draws from the previous body of Indian aesthetics and so forth, and the Cheta, the Vita, the Vidusaka, the Pitamarta are all found there, but the priyanarma-sakha is not found in those texts. So this is a unique contribution of Rupa Goswami, the priyanarma-sakha, the sakha, the dear friends of Krishna, who are privy to and participate fully in the romantic life of Radha and Krishna. I mean, the extent to which the narma-sakhas participate in Krishna's lila, romantic leelas, of course, is embodied in Subal Sakha, about whom Rupa Goswami has written a nice verse. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, this is a verse spoken by Rupa Manjari to another Sakhi, arguably a new, just entered the Leela devotee. She speaks to her with a view to inspire her with love for Subal. Kvashriman adhikari tam na subala seva vidho vindati. He said, it's a very important verse, and I've explained it at length at other times. Won't go into it here, but the verse says, the Rupa Manjari is marveling. What is the adhikar of Subal? There are no intimate leelas that he cannot participate in, such as his position. So she's saying this to a young, new, just appeared in the leela, sadhana siddha, Sakhi or Manjari, making it clear that your loving romantic Madhurya participation in the Leela is such that it should involve a friendship with Subal. We should take note of him. There's a beautiful verse of Rupa Goswami in another of his texts where he himself, in the voice of Rupa Manjari in Bhava, praises Subal. Oh, that you know very intimately the daughter of Rishabhanu Maharaj and the son of Nanda Maharaj. Please make my case to them that I might have their service and so forth. So the point here being that these narma-sakhas, they are probably the no doubt the best example of how Sakhya Rasa integrates with Madhurya Rasa. Indeed, their Sakhya Rasa is influenced on an ongoing basis by Madhurya Rasa. They see in Krishna his own Madhurya Rasa. They see him experiencing that, and they they're attracted to it in him, what it does for him, their friend, and so they want to participate in it to assist him in that, because they see it can steal his mind away from cow herding. So seeing that in him, they want to participate in that, and so they're intimately involved in all of these romantic life. So this is then 4 examples of Sakhya rasa, and how it is essential ingredient in the loving affairs of Madhurya rasa that pervade the Paraki bhav, that pervades Braj. Going from there, of course, we come to the fact that aside from the cowherd boys who are in Sakhya rasa, as I mentioned, the Kanta bhav of Radha is surrounded with Sakhi bhav, her friends, her female friends, right? And their love for one another is termed Sakhi-pranaya. Sakhi-pranaya. So Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami compares Sakhi-pranaya with Radha's soothing, I should say, sandalwood paste that's smeared on her body. So the nearness and the soothing influence, if you will, of her female friends. Krishnadas Kaviraj Goswami is very emphatic in Chaitanya Charitamrita that without the influence of these Sakhis, Radha and Krishna's affairs cannot take place. By extension, that would include the Sakhi bhav, as it's sometimes called, of the priyanarma-sakhas, cowherd boyfriends. But here we're talking about Radha's girlfriends, and the Manjaris in particular. Now, the Manjaris, it is true that there's a famous verse of Raghunath Das Goswami where he says, well, we're not interested in Sakhya. I don't want to be the friend of Radha. I want to be the maidservant of Radha. So this is a kind of a differentiation within Sakhi, the Sakhi bhav and the Sakhi-pranaya, the love between Radha and her friends, a distinguishing within Sakhi bhav the type of Sakhi bhav that has an emphasis on dasya, dasya. But we cannot say that it's devoid altogether of Sakhi, just like all the dasya bhav for Krishna in Braj is influenced by, tempered by, tinged with Sakhya. So this Manjari bhav also, and therefore, in Rupa Goswami Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, he describes when he describes Suhridrati, which means love of the friend, how one devotee loves Krishna is one thing, but how they love a friend of theirs is another thing. That's called Suhridrati. Suhrid means friend. So in the context of explaining that, typically what Jiva Goswami and Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur have explained, of course, is that this love of the friend serves as a sanchari bhav to augment the sthayi bhav, the dominant emotion for on the part of a gopi, in this case, for Krishna. However, sanchari bhav means it comes and it goes. It expresses itself and it recedes, and it nourishes and it takes it to new heights. But he says there's something else. The commentators say called bhavulas. So an ulas of the bhav, in which case the Sakhi loves her friend a little bit more than Krishna. You can love the friend less than Krishna, or love the friend equal to Krishna, in which case that Suhridrati, that love of the friend, will act as a sanchari and augmenting the love for Krishna, the sthayi bhav for Krishna. But in a case where they love the friend more than Krishna, the classic example, of course, is the Manjaris, who have this Radha Snehadika. They have more affection for Krishna, for Radha, than Krishna, being her maidservants, that type of friend of Radha. In that case, the extraordinary nature of that bhav is that it that it gets reversed in that rather than the love of the friend augmenting the dominant emotion of romantic love for Krishna, the romantic love for Krishna augments their love for Radha. And suddenly Radha is elevated along with Krishna to be the combined object of love, the Vishaya Lambana, for this this rasa. So this is peculiar, interesting, and of course this is the extreme form of Sakhi Bhav that we call Manjari Bhav, also called Bhavalas. But all of this love of the female friends, in this instance, as we're talking about it for one another, this is called Sakhi-pranaya. And this is another way in which this is not Sakya rasa for Krishna on the part of gopis, but this is friendship amongst themselves. Another instance or another way of talking about how fraternal love, Suhridrati, plays a role, if you will, in the romantic life. And it's a prominent role because as I said earlier, without this Sakhi Bhav, Radha and Krishna's affairs cannot carry on. They cannot be complete. They cannot take place. So it's essential. So you can see, well, Jiva Goswami must be drawing on these things. And without that, it can't take place. So Sakhi Bhav is Sakhi Bhav, or as we're speaking about it here, as we did earlier, the male friends of Krishna, even their love is sometimes called Sakhi Bhav. So, we're kind of making a case to support Jiva Goswami's statement of how the Madhurya rasa of Braj, the Kanta Bhav, is mixed together with Sakhi, but it goes much further, and we'll come to that. From here, though, before we do that, there's another way in which we can talk about it, and that is, of course, the fact that pranay means literally like loving friendship. Pranay is central to Sakya rasa. Typically, it's talked about in Sakya rasa in terms of its marginal characteristic. It's a tasta lakshan, which is that amongst friends, even where reverence might be appropriate, it's not found because it gets in the way of the friendship. So this is the tatastha lakshan, and this is emphasized. But the tatastha lakshan is only possible if the swarup lakshan is in place. And the swarup lakshan, of course, is Vishramba. And Vishramba is the pradhan, the chief ingredient of Sakya rasa that distinguishes it, for example, from Dasya rasa, from Shanta rasa. Vishramba means a similar idea, but they are different, intimacy. And this, as I say, how can there be lack of regard in a positive sense without that kind of intimacy, right? But because that intimacy of love is more pronounced and nuanced, I should say more nuanced in Madhurya rasa, then in Uttama Lilavani, Rupa Goswami writes considerably about pranay within Madhurya rasa, with more emphasis on its swarup lakshan, or the intimacy, various degrees of it, and so on and so forth. But suffice to say that this pranay is not an ingredient in Dasya rasa, Shanta rasa, but Salya rasa, only in Sakya rasa, only in Madhurya rasa. And it really overwhelmingly defines the Sakya rasa, and we find that it has a prominent role in Madhurya rasa. So again, we're building a case in support of this interesting idea that Radha, this is the implication of what Jiva Goswami is saying, that Radha's love, she's the principal heroine, the principal example of Kanta Bhav, is mixed with with Sakhya. Now, that's not what's been said so far in all that I've said, but I have spoken about different ways in which this Sakhi Bhav plays a favorable role. But with that, now let us take a look at what Jiva Goswami actually says in context. Let's look at the larger context. We find this in Priti Sandarbha 84, I believe it is. And what he's talking about there is, for all intents and purposes, what Rupa Goswami refers to as Sankul Bhav. I've used this term earlier. Sankul Bhav means a combination of bhavas. And there are examples of this, classic examples like Yudhisthira Maharaj or Balaram. Balaram has Sakhya rasa, which is prominent, and he's defined by that, but his Sakhya rasa is combined with Vatsalya and Dasya. And so we find instances in the scripture where he's actually relating with Krishna in Dasya rasa, like when he was amazed to realize what Krishna had done during the Brahma Vimohan Leela. And he pays respects to the power, the mystical power, the Shakti of Krishna to bring about what he did and so forth. This is said to be an example of his Dasya Bhav. His Dasya Bhav is prominent in other instances outside of Braj primarily. And his Vatsalya Rasa is there when he acts as the elder, caring for Krishna, watching out for him, and so forth and so on. So there are a number of examples. Uddhava is an example. His Dasya is mixed with bundled together with Sakhya, and so on. Rupa Goswami gives a number of examples. Now, in all of his examples, he does not include Madhurya Rasa in any package, if you will, of combined or mixed bhavas. So one might conclude that there is no Sankul Bhav that includes Madhurya Rasa. But relevant to our discussion, in Priti Sandarbha 84, what Jiva Goswami is talking about, without invoking the term Sankul Bhav, he uses the term Mishra, which means mixed. He's talking about exactly the same thing, and he gives all the same examples: Yudhisthira, Balaram, Purnamasi, Uddhava, and so on. He's talking about the exact same subject. He doesn't invoke the term Sankul, but again, he uses Mishra instead, mixed. And as he comes to the conclusion of that section, this is what he says. This is what the line, if you will, that we're discussing. He says, and the Braj, the Kantabhava of Braj is Sakya Mishra. He goes on to say, and that Dwarka, the Kantabhav of the queens, is Dasya Mishra. Madhurya mixed with Dasya. So while Rupa Goswami does not give an example of Sankul Bhav, if you will, that includes Madhurya, Rupa Goswami has given an example, and it's a very prominent example. He says the Kanta Bhav of Braj is Sakya Mishra. So this is quite, this is different from what I've talked about so far. I've talked about different ways in which Sakya Bhav is involved with Madhurya Rasa and helps to make it happen, and is an essential ingredient, and so on and so forth. But the idea, this is the implication of what he's saying, that Radha, the principal heroine, her Kantabhav is an example of Madhurya mixed with Sakhya. So, like I say, we won't find that anywhere else, and he doesn't give any explanation, as if he thinks it's not very controversial, because he's not short in his pen or breath for giving explanations and dealing with controversial issues. The whole controversial issue of Krishna's two Bhagavan Swami, he's written a whole Sandarbha about it, right? So he's not, he's up for the challenge of anything that he says that might be controversial, but in his own mind, he doesn't appear to think it's controversial at all. then we think, well, gee, it would be nice if there was some example in the Leela that we could draw from to give support to the case. Just like, how do we determine that Balaram has this combined Sankul Bhav? Because we see him acting in this way. We show examples of Yudhisthira Maharaj, or examples of Uddhava, and so on and so forth. And that's the final praman. So we're looking for that. Where can we find any praman for this? I wasn't going to write about this, and I wasn't going to, which means I wouldn't have been talking about it either. But I brought it up when I was in Madhavan, I think last year. I was talking with Brindaranya over the Skype, and talking to her about this. And I said, I don't think I'm going to, go into this in my book. And she just implored me, Gurmaj, you have to do this. You have to. So I have to give her some credit for that kind of encouragement to look into the topic and find support for it. So with that said, let me go to, as I said I would, a statement from a verse from Raghunath Das Goswami's Brajavilas Stava. The Brajavilas Stava of Raghunath Das Goswami is a very beautiful book. It's over 100 verses, just describing different devotees and settings, features of the Braj Leela, the Jamuna, the Govardhan Hill, Nandishwar, Subal, Sridham, Leta, Vishaka, Purnamasi, Nanda, Yashoda, and so forth, verse after verse. It's a very, very nice text, and I've thought of writing an extended commentary on it, but it's a very just like an introduction to everybody and everything that's of consequence, or many things, I should say, that are important to acquaint us with our desired destination, how things work, who's who, and where the sacred geography, and so on and so forth. So very beautiful book. And towards the end there in verse 93, he says, Malikritya nija sakhi priyatama garvena sambhavita malibhuya mad ishwari rasamayi malatvam utkantaya yasmin samyagupeyusha bhakabidha radhaniyudham muda kurvana mandanasya tosham atanod bandirakam tam bhaje. I'll give you my poetic translation of this. Das Goswami says, I worship Bandiravan, where Rasamayi Radha, my Ishwari, the beloved of Hari, dressed herself as a wrestler along with her Sakhis, as did Hari. Proud and eager to play, she battled with Bakari, resulting in Madanatoshini. So here we find Raghunath Das Goswami's glorification of Bandiravan. Bandiravan is the a forest of Braj that is centered on the famous banyan tree. It's described in the Puranas, and it's a central meeting place. It's actually a yoga pit for Sakya-rasa. So it's kind of a symbol there. Make plans for the day and spread out from there. The descriptions of the Puranas are very extraordinary of the tree. Limbs extending all the way across the Jamuna, practically, so that you could just it's a city, it's a village, or it's a whole complex. The tree, and it's typically a place where Krishna meets with his friends. So to envision the Bandir tree, Krishna and Balaram surrounded by their friends, this is a dhyan, if you will, for Sakya-rasa. Again, it's a sacred shrine, a yoga pit, a shrine, a meeting place for yoga, for union in Sakya-rasa. So Das Goswami is glorifying this place, and he glorifies it with regard to a particular incident relative to our discussion. He says, I worship Bandiravan, the forest, and the tree is the implication, where Rasamai Radha, my Ishwari. Now he's speaking as a Manjari. She's my Ishwari. Ishwari implies the service side, maid servant, on the part of the bhav. As I said, the bhav of the Manjaris is a, with regard to Radha, as an object of their love is a kind of dasya within Madhurya. The Madhurya, the romantic feelings, the kama for Krishna that you can't take out of Madhurya rasa is subsumed, so to speak, or suppressed by the dasya and Sakhya on the part of the Manjari for Radha, which causes, of course, the Manjaris to have a platonic relationship and a friendly relationship with Krishna. We're talking about Kanta Bhav, but here is Sakhi Bhav. Sakhi Bhav is basically about experiencing Kanta Bhav vicariously, indirectly. So whatever is true for Kanta Bhav should be true for Sakhi Bhav as well. But here's another way in which we can talk about that, of course. The Manjaris have a relationship with Krishna, but it's not a relationship in which they want to directly be romantically involved with him. So they have a platonic, they have a friendly relationship with Krishna. So anyway, Ishwari is an important word here. The indication of it is that a Manjari is speaking here. I worship Bandiravam, where Rasamai, Radha, my Ishwari, Das Goswami says, the beloved of Hari, dressed herself as a wrestler along with her Sakhis, as did Hari. So we find a description of this in Bhakti Ratnakar. Bhakti Ratnakar, part of Bhakti Ratnakar is takes us on a tour, if you will, of Braj. I forget who's leading the tour and who's being on the tour, but one devotee is taking other devotees through Braj and saying, this happened here, this happened here, this happened here, and so forth and so on, as revealed by the Goswamis. So there, in Bhakti Ratnakar, there's a description of this day, or this Leela, I should say. And it's a day in which Krishna is at the bandir, the banyan tree, but he's alone. And one of the Leelas that's prominent there amongst his friends is wrestling. This wrestling is an example of what's called Yudhavira. Yudhavira is a secondary rasa that's very friendly to Sakhya rasa. So we find Krishna's friends wrestling with one another, sometimes defeating him, as a result of which he has to carry them on his shoulders. The prominent example of this in the Prakat Leela, of course, is Balaram's slaying of Pralambha, right? They were all playing underneath the bandir in that vicinity, and Krishna noticed that amongst us there's a demon dressed as a coward boy, and his omniscience is coming to the fore, and he lets Balaram know about it. And then to deal with the situation, he suggests that they have a wrestling match and take sides. And so he lines them up. Balaram's on one side, Krishna on the other, and each boy is faced off with another boy, and Balaram gets faced off, of course, with Pralambha. And so this is common at the base of the bandir, and the slaying of Pralambha is an instance in the Prakat Leela where it comes up, right? But in this day, Krishna's dressed with a wrestler and waiting for some friends to arrive. Meanwhile, he plays his flute, and Radha hears the flute nearby and comes to the bandir. It's not the first time she's been there. She comes there often, and she comes there more often than not when coming there dressed like Subal, whom she's a lookalike of, or Subal is a lookalike of Radha. That's of course an interesting subject in itself. But she comes there on this day with her friends, hearing the flute, attracted by that, and there she encounters Madan Gopal. And there he is, dressed like a wrestler. And so he makes his case for how good of a wrestler he is, right? And it's something that's, kind of amusing to Radha, because he's going to boast about how great of a wrestler he is. No one can defeat him. He always wins, and so on and so forth. Of course, she knows from her own brother, Sridham, who comes home sometimes, I defeated Krishna, and boasting in Sakya rasa pride. She knows that Krishna doesn't always win. He's not the best wrestler in Braj. He often loses to his friends, but she's charmed nonetheless by his presentation. And so one thing leads to another, and Radha sees fit to challenge him. If you're such a good wrestler, then wrestle with me. Krishna says, I could defeat you and all of your girlfriends together. But if you want to wrestle with me, then you get to be dressed like a wrestler. So they put on the dress of makeshift from their saris, turn them into, hike them up, and and so forth, and turn themselves into to look like wrestlers. And so, wow, the match begins, and all the Sakhis are watching, and Radha and Krishna are going to wrestle. So what's going on here? This is Yudhavira. Now, Yudhavira is this. Yuddha means to fight, right? So the Vira means hero, so heroic fighting, but it's a play fight, right? That they're experiencing. As Krishna with his friends, they're not really mad at one another. They're just playing, right? Although they can get a little angry at times in the context of it, but here now the question is this: is Radha participating in Yudhavira? Is Yudhavira a rasa that is favorable to Madhurya rasa, or is it unfavorable? Rupa Goswami says there are different opinions about it, and Kavi Karnapur is of the opinion it's not favorable, but we know it's favorable to Sakya rasa, very favorable. So we would do best, and in the context that we're talking about it, it would also be preferable to, in terms of looking for support for what Jiva Goswami says, to see this Madhurya rasa that Radha is participating in, to be a participation in Sakya rasa, augmented, as it is in this instance, by Yudhavira, the friend of Sakya rasa. And so they wrestle. And further support for this we can draw from the verse itself, the way I'm explaining it. That what's happening is that Radha, this is an example of Radha tasting Sakya rasa, augmented in this instance as it is by Yudhavira. Look at some of the words that Das Goswami has used. He says that Yasmin samyag upeyusa bakabida radhani yudham muda. Bakabidam is a name for Krishna. So this epithet for Krishna has been invoked by Das Goswami for good reason. This name, Bakabida, in my translation, I've used Bakari, just for the sake of the poetry, but the same meaning, the enemy of Baka, who slayed Baka. Who is Bakasura? But by this name, we are transported into the Sakya Rasa Leelas in Krishna's Sesh Kumar, the end of his Kumar Leela. Bakasura is a very important demon. Why? Let me explain. Prior to this, Krishna slayed Putana, Trinavarta, Shakatasura, and so forth, all in Madhuvan, on the other side of the Jamuna. In Sesh Kumar, the inhabitants. And now Krishna's owner, both paths, the end of his forms. This endless child just started Thus far, the point is, all the demons that Krishna slayed could easily be understood to have their demise could easily be attributed to something else. Because Krishna just, for example, weighted down Trinavarta, if you will, the whirlwind demon. He just suckled the breasts of Putana. How could she die from that? She must have died from something else. So there, at this point in the Leela, in the Prakat Leela, Krishna has not shown himself in terms of heroism, which is an udipana for Sakhya rasa. But coming to Vrindavan, as described in the Bhagavatam, herding calves now, just beginning, going out half a day, coming back with his friends. Vatsasura comes. It means a demon, a henchman of Kamsa, disguised as a calf. But Krishna just pulled on his tail and caused him to go around in a circle, and he died. So it wasn't really an act of overt valor, which is a prominent part of the Sakya rasa, which now is really coming to the fore as Krishna's coming of age into his boyhood. That Poganda, which is very where Sakya rasa is prominent. So, on the same day after killing Vatsasura, Bakasura appears on the scene, and Krishna slays Bakasura by splitting his beak open, and it's like, wow, he did something really heroic here, and it can't be denied that Krishna actually had the power to do this. You can imagine the boys are going to go home and talk about this. And Krishna did this. And of course, the parents will take it with a grain of salt and think that, boys will be boys, they'll exaggerate and so on and so forth. But the slaying of Bakasura is the point I'm making, it's very, very central to Sakya rasa. Here, an important ingredient of Sakya rasa is coming out in the Prakat Leela for the first time. The heroism of Krishna. Of course, it will go on from there. All the other demons he kills from there on after, all these boys are witnesses and assisting him, and Agasur and Keshi and Aristasur and so on and so forth. So this is the beginning of a whole line of heroic exploits on the part of Krishna that is only his friends are privy to, and as such, that heroism being an udipana for Sakya rasa is playing its role, doing its part. So with the epithet Bhakabidha, Bhakari, we're transported there into Sakya rasa. Das Goswami wants to take us into Sakya rasa. This is a Sakya rasa pastime, he's saying here. And Radha is participating in it. Now, how is she participating in it? Radha, Niyudham, Muda. So by the wrestling, Kuvan Maranasya Tosham. So in the context of the Leela itself, the wrestling, who wins? It becomes a draw. Radha can't defeat Krishna. Krishna can't defeat Krishna. Radha on the strength or in the terms of the expertise of wrestling, but on other grounds, in other terms, Radha, of course, is the victor, because the reason that Krishna can't defeat her is that he's too stunned by her beauty in the form of a wrestler. He's never seen a more beautiful wrestler than this. And it's distracting him. He can't display all of his, he's wrestling every day. She's not doing that. He must be pretty good and easy to defeat her, a village girl, but he can't because he's defeated by her beauty. He can employ all of his wrestling expertise, charmed by her. And this is called Madana Toshani. So Madan, of course, means Cupid, and Krishna is the transcendental Cupid. You can say Cupid was stunned by it, but Krishna was stunned by it. Toshani means pleasure. So for the pleasure, or as resulting in the pleasure of Madana. Now, Madana Toshini, Madana means, of course, this is now Madhurya rasa. So he's invoked Sakhya rasa by the epithet Bhakabida, referring to Krishna. Now he's referring to Krishna as Madana, Madana Toshini, for the pleasure of Madana, means this is a Madhurya rasa epithet. So he's got them both here combined in the verse. And thus we see an example from this in support of what Jiva Goswami has said. What is that? That the Kanta bhav, which would be Radha's bhav, is a mixture of dasya, of Madhurya with Sakhya. Now, of course, obviously, the Madhurya is prominent, the Sakhya is secondary, but it shows itself from time to time. And this is an instance in the Leela that we find this. So it's a very, it's a very interesting theological topic, and something I came across that I felt should be addressed, but I wasn't sure how to go about it. And I was implored, as I say, by Brindaranya, you should do it. And this is what we came up with. I feel it's quite reasonable support for Jiva Goswami's statement and sensibilities. Are there any questions? Shri Radhe Ki Jai. While you're thinking about that, questions, that is, I will also answer a question that was asked to me the other day by the devotees from Unabhumi in Brazil. They asked about the appearance of Radharani and stated that it's commonly known that she was found on a lotus in the Jamuna by Nanda Maharaj, but in some previous discussion, I had mentioned something about her being kidnapped by Putana, and that in relation to her appearance. So they weren't familiar with that. Some of you may not be familiar with that. So I'll answer that question for those devotees and for everyone assembled. Of course, the idea that Radha was found in the Jamuna on a lotus, it's not found anywhere that I'm aware of in the Goswami's writings or in the Bhagavad. It may be found in maybe the Padma Purana. I'm not sure, but I haven't seen the verse. It may very well just be part of the oral tradition. But in Rupa Goswami's drama, Lalita Madhava, he explains the birth of Krishna in some detail. Now, at the same time, we will honor the oral tradition, or as I said, if that idea of her appearing on a lotus in the Jamuna is found in the Padma Purana, it may be honor that. And Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur himself has said that the Leela in the Lalita Madhava of Rupa Goswami is a different Prakat Leela, another version of the Prakat Leela, different from the one found in the Bhagavatam. So you can look at it like that, another birth story in another instance in which the Prakat Leela is manifested, Radha has to appear. So it's rather a curious story, but basically both Radha and Chandravali are the sons of Vrishabhanu and Chandrabhanu, the brother, one of the brothers of Vrishabhanu, respectively. And so they're cousin sisters, if you will. And they were transferred somehow by Yogamaya from the womb of their fathers into the womb of the wife of the Vindhya mountain range, who had a quarrel with the Himalayas. And the Himalayas, it's a long story, but they boasted about their the glory of their son-in-law, Shiva. She was married to Parvati. Parvati is a form of Durga who's Parvati. Parvat means the mountain, identified with the Himalayas. So she's the daughter of the Himalayas, and her husband is Shiva, and he's very glorious. So the Vindhya Mountains won a boon from Brahma, and the boon that they asked for was the Vindhya Mountain wanted to have a son-in-law better than Shiva, more glorious than Shiva. And so, based on Brahma's curse, which God, if Brahma gives Brahma's benediction, if Brahma gives a benediction, it has to come true. So these girls were transferred to the Vindhya Mountain range and born there. And during the time then, at that period, of course, Durga or Krishna's sister, being transferred from Braj to Mathura, prophesied before Kamsa and threatened him that these girls have been born and in different parts of the world and so forth, and they're going to be trouble for you, and the boy that will kill you his slave has also been born, and so on and so forth. So Kamsa sent out Putana, and one of her missions was to kidnap all the girls, just like all the boys born in a certain time period who might, be the one who would slay him or to be killed. And then imagine what a peril this was for the Braj community, right? And surrounding villages and so forth. And the girls were to be kidnapped. So Putana kidnapped 8 girls, flying with them in the sky, and the Brahmin seeing this cursed her and did a sacrifice and so forth, and she fell from that. Chandravali fell in one place, was brought to the Braj, and through that poetic device, Rupa Goswami begins his identification of her with Rukmini. That's a separate thing, but Radha and others, Purnamasi rescued from Putana and brought them to their respective fathers and mothers. In the case of Radha, Vishwabhanumaj and Kirtida. So this is another birth story, if you will, of Radha that involves Putana. Jai, Sri Radhe ki Jai. Are there any other questions?
I think so. Anybody else have a question?
Yes, someone asked the name of the book, and Maharaj just answered it. Vrajavilasa Stava that I cited, verse 93. All right, well, tomorrow we're going to get together for questions and answers in general and so forth. So if anything comes to mind from the talk today that you didn't in the time allotted, then you can ask tomorrow. And I look forward to seeing you there. And it's nice to speak with you about this subject, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Jai. Radhastami. Jai.
Jai.
Om Premanande.
Hare